Hello everyone, I am Jamie Shifley and you are at home with the dietitian. Thank you for watching today. I'm changing it up a little. I won't be in the kitchen today. I am actually going to be talking about a topic that has been fairly trendy lately, considering the COVID epidemic, and we're going to be talking about vitamin D. So there have been some articles floating around about the connection between vitamin D and adverse, very poor results when people have COVID. So what they're finding is there's a correlation being the key, between a very poor outcome with COVID and low vitamin D levels. So what that means is that they're finding that those who had the worst outcomes from COVID also were very low in vitamin D, a large percentage. Now, it would, what they're saying is possibly this is a connection, and that one of the, risk factors is low vitamin D status. But other studies are finding that we can't necessarily make that connection. And vitamin D is tricky, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. There were a bunch of studies about 10 years ago connecting low vitamin D to higher risk of certain diseases, such as certain cancers, autoimmune dysfunction, increased inflammation in the vessels, diabetes. So we do need more research around this connection, whether or not there's a true cause of low vitamin D and these diseases. That said, many people are low in vitamin D. So what is vitamin D? The funny thing is, it is not technically, in the true sense of the word, a vitamin, because a vitamin is a compound that we need to take in, to eat, to ingest, to get a shot, or eat a food, or take a supplement in order to maintain a healthy body. So that's the true definition of a vitamin. But our bodies can actually make vitamin D. So when our skin is exposed to UVB sunlight, there's a conversion that takes place that creates vitamin D. Now, there's a couple more steps that actually happen in the body to make it be a fully functioning vitamin. So there's one step in the liver and then a final step in the kidneys. But we could, with the right amount of sun exposure, make all the vitamin D that we need. Now, that is the issue though, because depending on the time of year, which affects the angle of the sun and the amount of sunlight exposure that we get, most people aren't getting that enough exposure to sun to get the vitamin D that they need at the recommended level. There's also other factors like skin tone. So if you have a darker skin tone, that blocks that conversion of vitamin D. So you're not going to make enough by getting exposed to the light. And those who wear more clothing, if they're more covered, obviously they're not getting that exposure. And then the risk of skin cancer. So, there's a delicate balance, and, dermatologists are going to say, well, you shouldn't be out in the sun too long. So what they do say is at least having your arms exposed and your face exposed without sunscreen for around 15 minutes a day in summer sun should be enough to get enough conversion. Now, that's obviously, not going to happen all year round. So we do need to take it in from food. And then beyond that, you don't want to go too long in the sun, because obviously then your skin cancer risk increases. So it's a tricky situation. And the other tricky thing is that there are not a lot of foods that contain much vitamin D. So it is a difficult nutrient to take in or get enough of. So today I have a few examples of foods that are good sources of vitamin D. So back, when they actually first discovered in the 1700s that kids, when they're put outside and exposed to sunlight, didn't get rickets. So that was the children who didn't have enough sunlight or didn't take in enough vitamin D had trouble with their bones, because vitamin D is responsible for bone mineralization. That's one of the biggest things. So that's why when these kids didn't get sun exposure, they ended up with rickets, which is a disabling condition of the bones. It's also responsible for a healthy immune system. It's part of blood pressure regulation, insulin secretion, cell growth, and nerve function. So, the healthy immune system, and especially with the lungs, so with infections involved in the lungs, vitamin D has a very important role in that. So that's why there might be this connection with the coronavirus. So anyway, back to the foods that we can get it from. So back when they discovered that it was vitamin D that was a substance that people needed to prevent rickets, they started fortifying foods with it. So you'll see it in some breads. You'll see it in certain cereals that are fortified, and fortified means they added it to that food. You'll see it in milks because they fortify it with vitamin D to make sure that the general public is getting enough. You do want to look on the label because not all cereals are fortified with vitamin D. And the same thing goes for tofu. So some tofus are fortified with vitamin D, but not all. Another good source, egg yolks have a little bit. So that's another way you can get vitamin D, so regularly including eggs. Also fatty fish like tuna, and we'll pretend this is salmon. So those, and mackerel and trout also are a good source of vitamin D. And mushrooms, white mushrooms, have a good source of a good amount of vitamin D. And then beef liver, so if you do any, pâtés or liver sausage, those are going to have a little bit. Not that I recommend doing those too much. So that is how you can get, those are some foods where you can get vitamin D. So I would say, maybe regularly have some fatty fish each week. Include some mushrooms in your pasta or your salads. Eat eggs a few times a week. Check your cereal and try and get a cereal that is fortified with vitamin D. Also, if you're drinking milk regularly, unfortunately, a lot of yogurts don't have it. Again, look on the label, and I'll show you. So if you look, now this is a little difficult to see, they'll have all of the fat, sodium, whatnot, and then they have percentages of vitamins at the bottom. And that is where you can check. And they don't always list vitamin D, but this one does. So one serving is a 15% of your vitamin D needs for the day. Now, if these aren't foods that you regularly eat and you feel like you're low, vitamin D is definitely something that I would recommend supplementing with on a regular basis, especially in the winter when you're not getting that sun exposure, in the northern climates. So you could take a multivitamin. For children and adults between 1 and 70, you should have 600 IUs a day. Infants, especially breastfed infants, formulas are fortified with them, but breast milk obviously doesn't have a whole lot. So they should be given 400 IUs, and IUs are international units, and that's how you'll see it on the label. So the infant should be given 400 IUs, adults 1 to 70 should be given 600 IUs, and beyond that it's actually a little bit higher. It's, I believe, 800 IUs. And I'll put a link in the notes to the recommended amounts, and I'll post a couple of articles discussing vitamin D and good sources for your reference. So hopefully that helped give you an idea of vitamin D, and if you're concerned about your levels, talk to your doctor, and you can actually have a test done to see where you are. Many people are low in vitamin D. So if you're low, they might recommend a supplement, sometimes even a shot with a higher amount of vitamin D that you get periodically. So don't be afraid to talk to your doctor about that the next time you see them. And in the meantime, consider eating more of these foods and taking a supplement with vitamin D. So thank you for your time. Feel free to post any questions that you might have. And thank you for watching At Home with the Dietitian. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get notified when I post a new video. Thanks.